Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, October 22nd, 2018 regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission. May I have the first item?
Item 1A is roll call. Commissioner Gonzalez?
Here.
Commissioner Kirkjian?
Here.
Commissioner Sahakian?
Here.
Chairperson Yakubian?
Here. Next item?
Item 1B is flag salute.
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. What's the next item, please?
Item 2 is posting of the agenda. The agenda for the Monday, October 22nd, 2018 regular meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Friday, October 19, 2018, before 5 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Thank you. Next item?
Item 3 is an action item. Motion to appoint a new chairperson for the Traffic and Parking Commission for 1 year. This will be presented by Mr. Edward Heaty.
Thank you. As you know, this is the annual election or could be re-election also. It depends on the commissioners to appoint it will be for the next year, 12 months, the chairperson for this commission. This will be serving for 1 year term, and it can be, as mentioned, be reappointed, and we'll leave it open to you for election, and we need a motion for that.
We have a motion?
I would like to make a nomination, please. I would like to nominate and move that Commissioner Ara Kujirian be appointed as our new chairperson.
Okay. Second? You need a second.
I'll second that.
Second. Okay. So move. And that's the time I think you need to switch. Yes, if you don't mind.
You
Yeah,
got to
roll
vote
call
for
on
it,
that.
yeah.
I'll take roll call. Commissioner Gonzalez?
Yes.
New chairperson Kirkjian?
Yes.
Commissioner Sahakian?
Yes.
Commissioner Yakubian?
Yes.
Congratulations, Zara.
Thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez, for the nomination. I was not ready to be chairperson when I walked in tonight, but thank you, and we're all here to serve the public. Let's move item number 4, approval of minutes.
Item number 4, approval of minutes. 4A, approval of minutes for the April 26, 2018 regular meeting. I'm sorry, April 23rd.
Yes. Do I have a motion?
Yeah, go ahead.
I move approval of the minutes of April the 23rd, our regular meeting, and then the September 26th special meeting.
Roll call?
Well,
we need a second.
Mr. Chair, if I may, we need to separate the two because I need to abstain from the special meeting. I wasn't present, so I can vote only for the first one.
Okay. In that case, let's have a vote. Let's vote on item number 4A, April 23rd meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Sorry, we need a second on that initial motion.
Just got it.
Okay.
You good?
Okay, I'll take roll call.
For his to abstain, Commissioner Sahakian?
No, we need a second on the motion for approval of the April 23rd minutes.
That's what he moved, and
I moved it,
And I second
I
that.
second.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
so let's vote on that.
Roll call. Commissioner Gonzalez?
yes.
Chairperson Kirkjian?
Yes?
Commissioner Sahakian?
Yes.
Commissioner Yakubian?
Yes.
Now let's have a roll call for item number 4B, the September 26th minutes.
4B is approval of minutes for the September 26th special meeting.
Let's have a roll call. Let's have a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion. Being present at the meeting, I will move for approval of the minutes.
Second?
Let's have a roll call.
Roll call, Commissioner Gonzalez,
Yes.
Chairperson Kirkjian,
Yes.
Commissioner Sahakian,
Abstain?
Commissioner Yakubian.
Yes.
Let's have item number 5 on our agenda, please.
Number 5 is oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision.
Do we have any speaker cards? No cards.
I have no speaker cards.
Let's move to item number 6.
Item number 6 is public hearing, renewal of an owner's permit to operate taxi cab service in the city of Glendale by San Gabriel Transit Incorporated, doing business as Bell Cab Company. Mr. Edward Heaty will be presenting this item.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairperson Kirkjian and the commissioners and staff and the public presence here. This item before you is the public hearing, agenda number 6, regarding the application renewal request for the owner permit for the 5-year renewal by the taxi service in Glendale by St. Gabriel Transit Inc., DBA Bell Cab. The staff received the application back on July 31st, 2018, in order to address the request for the owner permit operation. This is for 12 cabs known as Bell Cab in the city of Glendale. The staff has to go through 12 findings in order to assess, evaluate the application, bring it before you on whether the applicant met or not meet or some of those findings. Those 12 findings are listed in the staff report here. I can briefly go through it, or if you have any questions, you can open it to the public. It's up to you how you would like to.
Not quite. Okay, let's proceed, Mr.
You want to proceed?
Yes, let's
with,
proceed.
with open it with the public?
Yes.
Okay. The staff is available here. We have Steve Rodriguez. He's with the code enforcement. Will be available for any questions that you may have regarding the application. And we have also tonight Mr. Stephen Niemand. He's representing the owner. He's the general counsel of St. Gabriel Transit Inc., also known as Bell Cab. He's tonight, my understanding. Thank you.
Okay. Stephen, are you the one that will be presenting this case?
I'm here representing.
Yes. Okay. Let's
Transit Bell Cab.
let's proceed.
Good evening, Mr. Chairperson, members of the commission. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. We've been providing very good taxi cab service for, I think, 24 years now in the city of Glendale. It's been our privilege to do so, and we're hoping to continue to do so. I'm happy to answer any questions the commission may have. And I also have with me Mr. Bogdanian, who's our operations consultant, and I don't personally get too involved with the day-to-day operations, but he's familiar with everything and can also answer any operational questions that any of you may have.
Now, how many total vehicles are involved?
I believe it's 12 vehicles in the city of Glendale.
So just the 12. And I know staff did a thorough check on this one, but can you tell us, or for the benefit of the viewing public, how many of them are energy efficient or?
Mr. Bogdanian could answer that question. I personally, as I said, I'm the general counsel, so I handle more of the sort of the business end of it. But Mr. Bogdanian is our operations consultant. He could tell you that if I could invite him up.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions to?
I have any questions based on staff findings, I'm ready to move to approve. But if we have questions to Mr. Bagdanian, yes.
Good evening, John Bagdanian, JB Associates. I'm consultant with San Gabriel Transit. The 12 vehicles, 11 of the vehicles are all Toyota Priuses. They're all hybrid vehicles. One of them is a Ford Crown Victoria that would be sure to replace with a hybrid vehicle. So they're all basically clean energy type of vehicles.
That's why I want to make sure we hear that. And anyone else has any questions, Mr. Magdanian?
No, I'm good.
Okay,
Motion to approve?
I'll second that.
roll call, please.
Roll call. Commissioner Gonzalez,
Yes.
Chairperson Kirkjian,
Yes?
Commissioner Sahakian,
Yes.
Commissioner Yakubian.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's move to item number 7.
Item number 7 is information only. 7A is presentation on Metro Next Gen study.
Good evening, Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Scott Page, Senior Director of Service Planning for Metro, and I'm here tonight to tell you about our Next Gen study. Let's see here. Wow. So what is Next Gen, and why are we doing this? Well, our bus network is outdated. It probably hasn't been changed for at least 25 years. More people have moved into LA County, at least 1 million and plus. There are more places to go, more destinations, new developments that have popped up over the last 25 years, and there are more ways to get there. Travel patterns have changed for people. So this just gives you a brief update of our outreach to date, and we're adding to it all the time. Starting in January, we'll be doing more public outreach and public workshops throughout LA County. We'll be posting those on our website. They'll be held during the week from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. So we'll be sharing that information with the Glendale Beeline folks. So this is an idea. We've done so many surveys, community events. I've been at the bicycle events, all kinds of things we've been to, and counting.
I have a question, please, if I may. Outreach to date, is this for a year, or is this since we were?
No, this is just since the study started about 4 or 5 months ago.
So this information came about as a result of a study based on time before 4 or 5 months ago? Or just
No,
within?
this is just since we started the Next Gen study.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually have a consultant that's in charge of all the outreach. We've been at community events, farmers markets, all the service councils. We've met with the bus drivers unions, representatives. We've been to faith-based organizations.
Within that 3 to 4, that period?
Yes, sir.
4 months. Thank you. There's a lot.
We've been busy. So not too long ago, the Office of Extraordinary Innovation, prior to the beginning of this study, that's a Metro office, did some surveys. They actually surveyed 16,000 people, and they identified 4 types of Metro customers: the frequent customer, the occasional customer, the infrequent, and the non-rider customer. And as a percentage of all LA County residents, only 7% are frequent riders. And we find that those 7% represent 80% of all Metro boardings. So when we lose one customer, we lose 2 to 3 boardings a day. And we can't afford to continue to lose any more of those boardings. So as you can see, we have 22% occasional customers, 55% infrequent. They ride like maybe once or twice a year, and then the non-rider is 16%. So we wanted to look at transit accessibility. People say Metro doesn't go where they want to go anymore. So we basically looked at our current network here, and you can see by the different colors we offer a number of services throughout LA County. And something that we've done in this study that's never been done before that we know of in the U.S. is that we were able to purchase land-based data, lots of it, which is basically cell phone data. We purchased 5 million mobile devices who've been pinging all over LA County over 6 months. So that data was cleansed because that pinging data also includes when you go from here across the street to the French restaurant for lunch and come back. So that distance is so short, we're not interested in capturing that as a potential rider because you haven't gone anywhere, you've just walked across the street. So with that data, then we loaded all that cell phone data into our trip planner, the Metro Trip Planner, as well as Google Transit to determine if we are providing somewhat accessible service to those people who've been pinging over the last 6 months. And we found that 85% of those trips made in the region could be taken by public transit. Whether it's convenient or not is another question, and that's one of the things that we're pursuing through this study.
Mr. Page?
Yes, sir.
Can you please illustrate where you see the Glendale city limits in that map? I'm just having trouble discerning that. Well, it won't show on there. I think you have to. Yeah.
This triangle right here is pretty much the city limits of Glendale, as well as up into the Verdugo area up in here. So this right here is Glendale.
So the red one is Metrolink?
This is basically San Fernando Road right here.
Right.
We don't have any Metrolink on here. This is just all bus service.
All bus, okay.
So this right here is San Fernando Road. This right here is the 780, which comes across
Got it.
Broadway and then drops down Los Feliz. So I call it the Glendale Diamond. It's a diamond-shaped service.
Thank you.
Okay. So one of the other things that came out of the study that the Office of Innovation did was that the basic 3 things that people want: they want travel speed, they want to get there as fast as they can, they want frequent bus service, and they want reliable bus service. Not surprised by those 3 things. Current riders want more service, they want lower fares, and they want more information. As you know, in this age of we need it now and we want it instantly through cell phones and the other things that we have available, they want more and better frequent information, basically electronically. Former riders, they want improved security. They prefer more first mile, last mile ridership. That means when they get to the end of the line, is there some other way to get them to their location, such as Ubers, Lyfts, microtransit. And the infrequent riders want more information, first mile, last mile, they want some of that too, and both last two want comfort. They want an odorless ride, less crowding. So with existing levels of service, we can't be fast, frequent, and reliable all day, every day, everywhere. Therefore, we're developing service which will involve trade-offs. And those trade-offs could be, but not limited to, the items that you see before you, such as speed versus geographic coverage. Do we want to serve everywhere, or do we want to serve the best parts of LA County on the best streets with a higher speed, a higher frequency, or maybe better peak hour service? Also, hours of operation. Do we want to run earlier, later, or operate more service in the middle of the day? Full buses in high demand areas or few people on board in low demand areas. And that gets back to frequency versus coverage. And focus on current frequent riders or pursue occasional and new riders. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, about the pursuing of new riders. So those are just some examples of the trade-offs that we're looking at. So we need to develop policy choices that address the trade-offs based on the different needs of diverse travel markets in LA County. Transit is most competitive when no one drives more than twice, when the trip is no more than twice as slow as driving. So we found that if a drive takes 30 minutes in a car, then your bus ride shouldn't take longer than an hour, and people will take that extra 30 minutes to ride the bus. But after that twice as slow threshold is hit, then people aren't interested in riding public transit. So when is travel speed important? So we find that people who ride longer distances are more interested in being on board with a faster trip. They might walk and wait time is less, but they want to go faster on board. So 30% of their time is getting to and from transit, and 70% of their time is spent on board, and they want it to go as fast as possible. Travel speed is the key factor for longer trips. However, when is frequency important on shorter trips? And what we found is people are willing to walk and wait a little longer for a bus if they don't have to travel as far, if they're going a shorter distance. 50% of the time getting to and from transit is traded for 50% of the time on board the bus. Frequency is the key factor for shorter trips. So in other words, they don't mind spending a little more time walking there as long as a bus, say, for example, is running every 5 minutes. They don't have to wait as long. Whereas people who ride longer distances, they spend a little more time getting to where they're going, so it's driving to a park and ride, but then they want to be on that bus that's getting there as fast as possible. It's the difference between the two. So let's talk about competitiveness and market potential. So as I mentioned, we have combined land-based data, that's cell phone data, and we also have a lot of tap data because everybody in LA County is now on tap, which is the proximity card where you can put value on it. You can buy monthly passes, day passes, whichever system that each individual property is using. Metro oversees that data because we're the clearinghouse to make sure everybody gets paid. And each tap card has like a serial number on it. So we don't have any names associated with the tap cards, but we have serial numbers basically. And we actually can identify a round trip with that tap card. So let's say I recently was helping Ms. Engel with a bus stop problem up in Montrose. And out of curiosity, I wanted to see where in the heck are people in Montrose going? And believe it or not, there's a large number of people going to Hollywood. So they come down the hill, they transfer to our 180 or our 780, which goes across Los Feliz down Vermont, right on Hollywood Boulevard, and they're going to Hollywood. And I knew that through the tap card because they started on Montrose and they had another tap later that day over in Hollywood. So that's how we put together a round trip. It's very interesting data. And we have Glendale's data, Burbank's data, Pasadena's data, everybody's data, that anyone that's on tap, we have it. So we combined all that data together to figure out our transit market share by distance and percent of total trips. So what we found is that 16% of the total trips taken over 10 miles, we're serving 6% of that market, as well as 5% of that market at 5 to 10 miles. But what we found is that we're not serving the short distance market of 1 to 5 miles. Only 2% of our ridership is that market. So if we were to capture that 46%, increasing our transit share of short distance trips to 6% means 500,000 new riders. Should be a pretty easy gain, right? So that's told us right there that we are actually missing that market. We've been focused for a long time on the AM peak and PM peak commuter market. But what we're seeing through this tap data and when people ride is that they're riding later in the day, say 9 a.m. and later, and they're actually riding a little bit later in the evening until 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night. I have a saying around the office that I've worn this saying out, but it'll be new to you. And that is, not everybody is home cooking dinner at 6 p.m. So that's what the data is also showing, is that people work later, they stay later. I think there's more retail workers and restaurant workers that are riding our service that ride later into the night. So we haven't been capturing those people very well. So how do we attract more short distance non-commute trips? Well, we have more frequent service for non-commute trips. That's where we told you we just need to focus, more frequent service for non-commute trips. And what this graph shows is our traditional metro and traditional transit service day, and that's in that orange color. So what that shows is our bus schedules go up. See how the orange goes up on the left side, then it falls in the middle of the day, and then it goes up in the PM and then falls into the late evening. That's traditional transit scheduling and ridership based on how it's been for years and years. Many, many people rode in the AM, not so many in the midday, and then many, many rode in the PM. But what those bars are showing based on this data that we've got through tap cards and through cell phones is that the midday has seen a great increase in ridership, as well as the PM peak, and the AM peak isn't as robust as it used to be. So we're obviously putting a lot of money onto the street in the AM peak, but we're not getting our money's worth out of it, and we could gain more ridership in the midday based on the cell phone data, but we're not providing that ride. We're not providing that service or the frequency.
Excuse me, where does that leave Beeline and Burbank bus line and whatnot during midday. They're available midday and.
Oh, just wait till my final chit-chat here. We're going to get into that. I have that coming. Okay, so where does that leave them? It's kind of like a TV show where you wait for the next episode, right? So that's what this has been telling us, the cell phone data and the commute trips. And we can break that data down into time of day, direction of travel, whether it's an origin or a destination. Basically, it uses census tract data. We get down to the census tract level and can tell by all that cell phone pinging, which is identified with a census tract, where they're coming and where they're going, whether it's an origin or a destination. It's very interesting data. So the key takeaways are we have commute trips in the peak hour, and then we have other trips, which are all-day trips. We have short-distance trips, long-distance people want speed, short-distance people want frequency. In the short-distance department, we're only pretty much taking care of 8% of all trips, which is only 5% of the transit market share, but in long distance, we're doing much better with 9% of the market share. And the other trips, we're not doing even as well. We only have 2% of the market share for short distance and 4% for long distance. So we're doing okay in the market share for long distance, but we need to do better for short distance. We're successful in long distance and should continue to focus on this travel market. We're not competing well in our biggest potential market and need to rethink our service to better capture the short trip people. This slide I was going to show last month, but we had to wait till this month, so it's a little outdated. We're now moving along into November, and we're working with our consultants and going through the data to put together our service concepts. Then we start our service design guidelines, which is basically taking those concepts and determining how we're going to model our existing service and come up with new services and changes to go to new markets and attract new riders. We look at starting to implement what I call the low-hanging fruit that doesn't take too much work next June, or doesn't take a public hearing, and then the bulk of it we'll start implementing in December 2019. So now we get to how this fits into Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena, because they're all hooked together as part of the Arroyo Verdugo Transit Partnership. And unlike the other cities, we included those 3 cities in our study. So they're part of our study. Our consultants are looking at all the data of the 3 different cities. The next-gen data collection will include a drill-down component for Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena transit service areas. I was just telling Ms. Engel that they are going to be able to use and look at the very same tap data and cell phone data that we have. It's all public data. It's available to them as well. They're going to come downtown, and we're going to have a workshop to show them how to use the data, which is viewed through Tableau, which is sort of a new modern way of taking a lot of data and processing it so it's visual and you can change it any way that you want. So we've already written the program, and we're going through the data and making some changes to it, and then we'll have them downtown for a workshop. They also will have access to all of our tap data, so they'll see what our riders are doing in the city of Glendale, as well as they can see what their riders are doing in the city of Glendale too, because all the tap data is available. Combining the Metro Next Gen study with Glendale's route analysis, which you'll be hearing about after me, their study, and planning efforts from Burbank and Pasadena will reimagine service within the Arroyo Verdugo area. And this will include focusing on how travel takes place within and out of Glendale and the neighboring cities around Glendale, determining how Metro can improve connections with the Beeline services, limiting service overlap redundancies among Metro and Beeline services, and this is one of my pet projects with Ms. Engel, is looking at reducing service so that we each can have our own good market, and identifying infrastructure opportunities for improving bus speeds. So that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
I've got a question. So thank you for the presentation. However, I'm very concerned. I know at the last meeting, this was an issue that I brought up, but probably it's best to bring it up now. And that is that there's a national trend of declining in ridership, and it's nationwide, except for perhaps, I think, Seattle. That
Seattle,
doesn't,
yeah.
It doesn't have that issue. So there's a nationwide decline, and many can say this is attributed to the increase in ridership in alternative modes of transportation, such as Uber and Lyft and all of these other, services. So at the last meeting, I remember this was my big concern because we were talking about money and appropriation and, just discussion of how money should be kind of spent. And my big concern was this idea of Metro pouring in tons of money into the idea of doing exactly this, right? So fixing the this not just speed, but the frequencies and the shortness of travel time. But when you have now an increase of people taking these alternative modes of transportation, which is adding more congestion to our streets, that hasn't been, I would have loved to have seen some discussion of that or some sort of information about that. To me, it seems like, trying to plug 1,000 holes in a sinking ship without first addressing the fact, there's something kind of fundamentally serious happening in this whole idea of transportation that needs to be addressed. So that's my concern, is the money that's just being poured in when there seems to be a greater issue that needs to be addressed. And I know New York, for example, is limiting their permits to Uber and Lyft so that they can assess the impacts of this on the city because of the congestion. So I would love to have seen that component into the Metro's analysis as well.
In regard to Ubers and Lyfts, we're certainly well aware of the impact they're having on transit ridership. In the Office of Innovations, they actually are taking on a microtransit pilot program. And we're working with them to help identify areas where a microtransit system for first mile, last mile, as well as possibly filling in where Metro might be operating today in smaller markets, is currently underway. In regards to money, we will be using basically the same revenue service hours, or the same pot of money that we have today will be what we will be modifying and then re-implementing tomorrow. So we will not be at this particular time adding more money to the budget, so to speak, for the outcome of the study. Basically, we want to take the public's resources and put them where they should be, not necessarily where they're running today, but where we think they could benefit more people in the future. So we don't plan to, hopefully at this time, make any adjustments to our budget or our revenue service hours. It's a matter of, remember I talked about how there are choices? Well, those choices will be, how do we take our current revenue service hours and reallocate them and reuse them so that they benefit more people in the LA area for travel.
Thank you.
And I always like to say that Metro is 25 floors of bureaucracy, and that we have a section that's dealing with the TNCs and the lifts. I've been in some meetings with them as to also how they can go to areas and be in areas where transit maybe is not necessarily the best way to be there, such as maybe Porter Ranch has been wanting service for a long time, but the streets aren't laid out for buses. They don't have the sidewalks that we need or the bus stop locations that we need. That's a good spot for a TNC type operation, Uber and Lyft, that would pick people up in other places in the San Fernando Valley and then take them to Porter Ranch. So that's how we're viewing the TNCs and the lifts.
So following up on the Commissioner's question, you mentioned reference to Lyft and Uber. It sounds like that Metro is doing some partnering discussions, and then you used some kind of a transit phrase I'm not used to.
Microtransit.
Yeah, now is that, can you please define that? Is that where you put 4, 5, or 6 people in a vehicle?
There actually is, it's going to be something like a 12-passenger van.
Okay.
Yeah.
But so are you implying that there would be kind of a contractual arrangement with Metro and, say, Uber and Lyft and others who do that kind of work?
Yes, sir. In the case of the microtransit, they will be partnering with our labor union to provide the operators, but the microtransit folks would be managing the service under contract to Metro. So they would have their own dispatching type service. You know, they would take care of the vehicles, maintain the vehicles, and those kind of things.
Could you please address where that might be happening in what you call the Diamond, or maybe Burbank and Pasadena, and how would that affect the citizens in our city? Would there be potential micro-transit? Can we see something like that coming in the future, or is this a study that still is, it comes out and we don't know whether it'd be implemented or not?
Well, what's happened is an RFP went out on the street, and
By Metro?
By Metro, and a number of applicants have turned in, have turned in their response to the RFP. I've been involved in reviewing those RFPs as well as being at the presentations that were made by those applicants. And of course, I had to sign in blood that I couldn't talk about it at this time. So that sounds like maybe another presentation by the group that's doing that, the Office of Innovations that's managing the microtransit project. So at this time—
I was just going to go there and make that request. Office of Innovations, is that Metro?
Yes, sir. So basically, these will be pilot projects, and it doesn't mean that what is implemented, and there is something that's going to be implemented, by the way, you asked about that. It's more than just a study. It's to actually do an actual pilot microtransit. And it's not going to be just in one place, and it's going to be a number of places around LA County.
Does the outcome of that potentially address some of the issues here? It seems like it would, that you've just presented.
It would. It would for me, and it could also for Glendale. There's line 201, which goes up into the canyon. It's really not a big bus operation. The streets aren't made for big buses. It's a prime location for a TNC or microtransit type operation.
What's a TNC?
That's just a general term for Ubers and Lyfts.
And what's the acronym for it?
I don't know. Does anybody know what it means? Thank you.
Thank you.
Transportation network companies.
Okay. So that innovation group, I was not aware of that. Were other commissioners aware of that? Or Edward, are you aware of that at Metro? It just seems like it would be good to be hearing something from them. And who makes the decisions on the outcome of that? Is it the governance at Metro, or I seem to have to partner with free enterprise here?
I think the it's called Office of Extraordinary Innovation, who is managing the microtransit pilot program, will go to our board of directors most likely with the report, with a recommendation for where this is going to take place.
OEI, Office of...
OEI, exactly. That's what it's called.
Experimental, you said?
Extraordinary Innovation.
Innovation.
It's a mouthful.
Well, you kind of alluded to the fact that it might be good, there might be a presentation or a discussion, because the way our commissioner addressed the question seems like this might be a potential response to that, but it would really be good to see how it impacts the citizens here in Glendale.
Is to provide some coverage in places where big bus operations maybe isn't the thing that we need to be doing.
When do you think it might be good, if other commissioners concur, to see a study about that, or a presentation about it, if you have interest?
And I'm not quite sure where they are in the whole process of reviewing the RFPs or any of that. I can get with Ms. Engel, and she can provide you that information. I have to go back, to the office and find out where we are in that, and then I can tell Ms. Engel, and she can report that to staff.
Well, if other commissioners are in concurrence, I would think it would be a request that we should make.
I second that. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Page.
Just one quick question, if I may. What's the frequency right now of the short trips within the city of Glendale?
Oh, God, it varies. You mean how frequent is the bus service?
Yes.
Well, on Wilshire Boulevard, you can take a short trip about every 3 to 4 minutes.
In Glendale?
In Glendale, probably about every 10 to 15 minutes in the peaks. In the case of the 180, maybe every 10 minutes combined with the 780. We're looking at, one of the things we want to do is build a core network of the best lines and try to get them so they will be at least every 10 minutes at a minimum or better. And the base service, which we call midday, would be every 12 minutes.
Can
I'm sorry, I already spoke, but can I jump in again? I remember, I'm having deja vu, and I'm trying to remember, why am I having deja vu? And maybe you were here many, many years ago when we first were introduced to the idea of Uber coming into our towns, our cities by LAX. And fast forward, seems to be like an inconsistency. So we are a authority that's designated by the city to review, as we did tonight, taxi cab permit renewals. And it just seems, again, like the word is inconsistent or strange that for some reason we're not examining the detrimental effects, although we know the benefits, but the detrimental effects that these alternative like the Ubers and the Lyfts are doing to our city streets, such as the congestion, the pollution. It's working against Metro in many ways, including, with the congestion anyway, slowing down the buses and whatnot. And not 1 cent is given to the cities in return for all of this extra congestion and taxing on our city infrastructure, streets, and quality of life in other ways. We know the benefits again, but has that ever been discussed? Has that idea? We're not the agency or the authority to start discussing taxing Uber and Lyfts, but it seems to be a much greater issue that I remember, again, many years ago when this first came about. It was a very commonplace, common sense question to be asking is are they going to be paying the city back for all of the negative things that they put on? So I want to know, has that been discussed in Metro? Has that idea been tossed around, or municipalities? What have you heard on this?
Well, I know I've done some reading of studies that have been done by other cities that Uber and Lyft has contributed to traffic. San Francisco just finished one. I just was reading that recently in my news feed. I think New York City's done one. But at Metro, we do not manage, oversee, or have anything to do with Ubers or Lyfts. That's the city of Los Angeles. So I can't tell you what the city's doing. I know at Metro, we realize that there is a possibility that Uber and Lyft has probably taken some passengers from Metro. It's how many, we don't know what the numbers are. So in some cases, like I said, the Office of Extraordinary Innovation is looking at them as a potential partner for like the INZA lines out in areas where bus service might not be the answer to making the first mile, last mile trip. But as far as regulation, all the things that you talked about that you went through here in the city of Glendale some years ago, certainly at Metro, we're not in that.
You see more of a partnership direction with these alternative types of transportation as opposed to the idea of having them looked at more closely in terms of responsibility of those companies to maybe give back. And I would love to have seen this. I know you can't do it, but to see, I think it's significant. I know it's probably more affluent riders who are probably taking the Ubers just because of the cost analysis there. But I don't know where we'll be when we revisit this discussion, if I'm even on the commission here. But it's something that I feel has to be addressed by the city, and maybe we can, ask the city council to take a look or re-examine this idea of, how, especially our city, who's on the forefront of trying to reduce congestion and traffic and safety and trying to manage all of that. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we can ignore the influx of that in our city, but I do appreciate your response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me.
First of all, thank you for the presentation, Scott. And the question I have for Metro, is, I guess autonomous vehicles are upon us. They'll be here very soon. And Metro, the way it is, it's underutilized.
Metro's what?
It's underutilized the way it is right now, both bus and the train. Are there any plans to not to lose any ridership, if you will, to autonomous vehicles?
That's way off in the future, and it's certainly not part of this study. I don't know how autonomous vehicles are going to, I see autonomous vehicles as being nothing more than just more Ubers and Lyfts. And Ubers and Lyfts themselves may be autonomous. I mean, certainly Lyft was at the forefront of studying this. So I'm not sure if they're still studying autonomous vehicles. I think they were in certain cities like Pittsburgh, and it didn't work out too well. It still needs more refinement. So I think it's a little far off for me or anyone to say how that's going to fit into public transit.
It's not going to fit in so much public transit. It'll be maybe competing with public transit. But
That's
my
very
understanding
possible.
is San Francisco will start having autonomous vehicles only in a couple of years. Ford, I guess, is working on that.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, does Metro want to invest a ton of money without knowing what the future will be? But again, I share your concern as far as Metro being underutilized.
Well, actually, you make an interesting point in that in a couple of years, and that's one of the things that we haven't done at Metro that we need to do at Metro, at least in my department, the service plan department, is we're going to have to react a lot faster because the world is moving much faster than public transit. That is a given. Ubers and Lyfts are just the beginning, or microtransit, or autonomous vehicles. I mean, you have to be able to respond quickly to the change because the change is very fast and it's coming. So I would like to say that those are all things that are coming in the future and we'll have to face them head on, but when they'll arrive, I'm not sure. And so at this particular juncture, we have Ubers and Lyfts and microtransit and a system that needs to be redesigned to also work to offset maybe any of the ridership loss that we've had to them.
But who knew a year ago that there's going to be limes and
You're absolutely right. There are limes and birds, and
Birds
who
and
knows
birds,
what's
yes.
coming next? More fruit and more birds. I don't know, but that's another thing that just popped up real suddenly, and I'm sure that we've probably lost a few short distance 1 mile to 2 mile riders who are jumping on their scooters.
Yeah.
It's very possible. I was just in Spokane, Washington for a conference, and the bird is there. You know, they're running. I don't know what they're going to do when it snows, but at least when it's not snowing, they're running around.
yeah. I mean, I heard this morning that they were sued last Friday. A class action lawsuit was filed against them in the city of Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah. Well, they just seem to end up in strange places. When people are done with them, they just get off of them, and that's it.
I have one more question, if I may, please.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Could you please tell me, Mr. Page, how long has the Office of Extraordinary Innovations been around at Metro?
I think for about 2 years.
2 years. And we can find information about them on the website?
I believe you can, if you go to metro.net, you should be able to find information about
Okay,
them,
thank
correct?
you.
And what their projects are, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Page, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Let's move to item number 7B.
Item number 7B, presentation on the city's transit route analysis.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. I'm Allison McCarley, Transit Associate at the Glendale B-Line. I'm here to talk to you about the Glendale B-Line transit route analysis. Just as Scott was talking about, the Glendale B-Line and Glendale B-Line service area is doing our own bus and transit study to focus on our own local conditions here in Glendale. Excuse me. Oh, sorry, I'm learning. So in this picture, explains why we need to reimagine transit. As you can see, 60 people on a bus, it moves much more efficiently than 60 people in a car, whether those 60 people in a car are single occupancy in an Uber or in a Lyft or even autonomous people. You know, there's much more space given to buses. It takes up less space to use a bus. So we also know Glendale has changed a lot. We've added over 10,000 new residents here in Glendale. We've seen an increased amount of apartments and residential units in downtown Glendale, a fluctuation of students at schools, as well as increased office space and the development of co-working spaces and campuses. We've seen expanded retail and entertainment venues, the growth of the Americana and the Glendale Galleria, as well as Scott mentioned, non-traditional work hours, more people are moving about in the city at different times. So investing in public transit is in line with the city's goal of to become an 18-hour multimodal city. An 18-hour city is a city plan developed by the Economic Development Department where citizens can live, work, and play all within the boundaries of Glendale. We believe transit is an important part to make this goal, to achieve this goal. Secondly, we want to become a multimodal city for which citizens have a real choice in how they move about the city. This could be either by transit, by bike, walking, or by car. But we want citizens to be able to have those choices to move efficiently. And third, we want to encourage use of transit as an option per the UCLA Fall in Ridership recommendations, as as Commission Member Jacobian mentioned. To expand on that, the UCLA recommendation was that if 1 out of 4 people replace a single driving trip with a transit trip once every 2 weeks, annual ridership would grow by 96 million in all of LA County. So this is the current Beeline and Glendale service area. Currently we serve Glendale, La Cañada, Flintridge, Montrose, La Crescenta, and Eastern Burbank, a portion of Eastern Burbank. We have a variety of service providers, including LA Metro, Glendale Beeline, and the La Cañada Shuttle. And we have connections to Burbank Bus, LA Dot, Metrolink, and Amtrak trains, as well as Pasadena Arts Bus.
Excuse me. Where do we have the connectivity to LA Department of Transportation?
So we have a park and ride. We have 2 park and rides. One is at Harvard by the 2 freeway, by Harvard and Broadway, by the In-N-Out, if you know. That's a park and ride, as well as by Verdugo Hills Hospital.
Thank you.
Of course. So what is a transit system reimagining? The transit system reimagining will study the city's travel demand patterns and design a system based on a blank slate look at it. For the transit system reimagining, we will look to see how people are traveling and where they're moving, regardless of mode. So we are wanting to look at people in both cars and buses. From that information, we will want to create a new bus service network along the corridors where people are most likely to use transit. And finally, our goal is to have a reliable and fast system that will support Glendale's goal to be a vibrant environment for people to live, work, and play. So the transit route analysis is a year-long project that will have 5 stages. Beginning in the next few weeks, we'll have the data collection, followed by a strong data analysis, which we will work with Metro Next Gen Study with, as well as an ongoing public outreach and comment portion, and finally, adoption of final recommendations and service change. So the data collection will have 2 aspects: a community survey, which will target both transit users and non-transit users in Glendale and the surrounding community, as well as a passenger survey and ride check, where we will collect an abundance of operational data to create a detailed picture of the current level of service in Glendale in terms of ridership, productivity, and performance. The outcomes of the data collection will be to identify new target markets, as well as identify new paths of communication to the different communities that we've reached out to in the community survey. Next, we have the data analysis, and this is where we try to understand where and why routes are successful, as well as where they are struggling. Are there gaps in the system, and how can we serve them? As well as what is each route's purpose? Do people use this to go to work, school, or to travel about? As well as route overlaps. We have a lot of parallel routes with Metro. Are these distinct lines, or are they just connections? The outcome of the data analysis will be to identify unique travel patterns and demands, and identify motivations and barriers for using transit here in Glendale. We also have our public outreach portion, and which will feature 16 to 20 in-depth stakeholder interviews. We are focusing on low-income groups, senior housing, large and major employers, school groups, Glendale Unified School District, Glendale Community College, and La Cañada School District, as well as reaching out to the new apartment developments in downtown Glendale and a variety of other civic and religious organizations. We want a deep understanding of the people who live here in Glendale and how they move about the city. Continuing, we also are going to utilize social media and other online materials and to have mass participation in a community-wide survey. AMA Transit, who is our consultant on this, have had previous experience where they were able to get over 7,000 individual responses through a community e-survey, and so we're hoping to have similar outcomes. Our outcomes are going to be customer focused. We want this to be about the community, as well as we want to identify groups and people who are willing to try transit and or alternate modes of transit, as well as we want diverse perspectives. We don't want just transit users, we want everyone to be involved in this process. And on that, we want a community buy-in. This is a public transit system, that means it's for the people, and we want the people to have a stake in this process. So the transit route analysis will have 3 terms for recommendations. First will be near term, which is using what money we have, what money and resources we have now, followed by midterm and long term, which is a 10-year plan out. Additionally, it will have a strong focus on future planning of the NoHo to Pasadena bus rapid transit that will be coming in Glendale, as well as potential Metrolink Glendale station, expansion of Glendale stations, and the Glendale streetcar. In general, what we hope to come out of this project is clarity about the role of the Glendale B-Line in the regional transit network here in Los Angeles, as well as transparent recommendations for service changes, an understanding of duplication in different markets, improved connections to other service providers, as well as new ideas for hard-to-reach areas. We have several communities here in Glendale that do not have any service, and we'd like to begin to involve them in our bus network, as well as recommendations for street improvements to increase bus speed, and finally, easy-to-use customer service information. And on that, by the end of this, we want to have beautiful new rider guides, maps, and schedules, and also select wayfinding opportunities so that this will be an easy system for anyone to use. And if you have any questions.
I do. I want to jump in.
Of course.
It's not really a question. And I'm sorry, your name again?
My name is Allison.
Allison, thank you so much for your presentation. So I love the Beeline because it is our community, kind of like our lifeline for the city of Glendale. So I'm going to throw out a very fabulous idea, and I wish it were mine, but it came from city of Pasadena that I happened to partake in a couple weeks ago. And it may be a collaborative effort between the Beeline and the City of Glendale's Arts and Culture Commission.
Sure.
To have something that the city of Pasadena puts on once a year, which is their art night. So it starts off at the Pasadena Central Library, and it has the cooperation of the museums and cultural venues throughout the city. And it basically, they will shuttle people for free around the city to enjoy and partake of all the wonderful things that Pasadena has to offer. And I'm a Glendalian, and I love Glendale, and I think that we have just as many wonderful things to offer. I just find that's a wonderful way to mesh, as you put in, a community buy-in, to use your words. How do you get the community to buy into the idea that there's this wonderful shuttle that takes you around to places you might want to go to, but to introduce them to all the fabulous places that we have? So by coming up with this kind of an idea or an event once a year and having the Beeline being the showcase to take the residents around, may introduce a whole slew of people. As I did in Pasadena, I saw a lot of people, jumping on the shuttle buses and going around. But it's a great way to get the city going, and then introduce. There's so many ways you can get people interested in the Beeline, right? I mean, you put out a new map, you put out a new thing, the timeline schedule, but to really get them invested would take a completely new thinking out of the box, I think. But it's just an idea to throw out, and my fellow commissioners on the Arts Commission, maybe you guys could, if you're watching tonight, maybe look into this and work with the Beeline to get something like that going. I think that would be a fabulous idea.
No, that's a wonderful idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Creepman. That's actually a very good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do. This is going to be a bit uncomfortable for me because it's embarrassing, but can you please tell me, this says City of Glendale, Transit Route Analysis, and it mentions the commission here. So it says Transportation and Parking Commission on the cover. So do I understand that, Miss Allison? What is your last name?
McCarley?
Macaulay? Thank you. This is by the City of Glendale?
Yes.
And-
We're a department here at Public Works.
It's within the Department of Public Works, and
Correct.
it's called the...
Glendale Beeline.
The what?
Glendale Beeline.
Just the beeline itself. Okay,
Yes.
so it's focused. Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me.
Of course.
So, Department of Public Works handles the beeline. So, right, is that correct?
Yes.
Don't other cities have a Department of Transportation that is separate from Public Works? Or it depends on the size of the city, or?
And that's true. And recently, that division used to be in the planning, transportation division. Used to be in Public Works, moved to the planning, and back recently to
I'm looking at the
Public
planning.
Works.
I'm looking at the planning aspects of such importance as the beeline, and why would it not come under planning as opposed to Public Works? What's the thinking there? Because this is meant as no disrespect to Public Works,
That's
but
okay.
I'm just looking at it relative to city planning, which is different than Public Works.
If I may ask Ms. Engel, who heads the division, and she has good history background of that, and why we are today, or why we change back and forth, if you
Thank
don't
you.
mind, Catherine. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Catherine Engel, Transit Manager. Transit systems throughout LA County are set up in a variety of different ways. Some of the regional operators are set up as their own departments within a city or are set up as a regional transit authority. But a lot of the local transit systems are set up as components of an existing city department. Either Public Works, it could be a community services, or a planning function. In Glendale, it's been in multiple departments. It doesn't, due to the nature of our system, because we're a federalized system, we kind of operate as a public utility. We're guided by California Public Utility Code, and then the FTA. So we can be in either the planning section or the Public Works section. We could be in administrative services. It's in different cities, it's in reports in different areas. It doesn't change the function of the transit system or how the transit system thinks or is operated necessarily. We're very interdisciplinary. So we touch the streets, so we work with engineering and Public Works. We help on some of the long-range planning. So if we're looking at streetcar, how streetcar would mesh in with beeline service on the street. So it doesn't really make any difference what department we're in. Our function's the same, and we're very interdisciplinary as far as how we process and how we think and how the service actually gets delivered.
So thank you very much for that overview. In looking at what Mr. Page, or Scott Page presented, a big organization at Metro compared to what we're talking about here, but just the essence of the concept of design and planning, which generally for something like this happens under a city planning banner. Is there someone in Public Works or in the Beeline group that is engaged in looking at innovative, extraordinary information on how to better deliver the transportation that other commissioners have asked about?
Yes, so that would be in the Community Development Department. Fred, sorry.
This is Allison's first time.
Yes.
That was very good, Allison. Thank you.
We're trying to give her some opportunity to
Sure.
take it out. So within the study right now for the transit route analysis, we are looking at microtransit as an option for service delivery in addition to the Beeline buses. And for us, microtransit, really, to translate that for Glendale, would be like a general dial-a-ride. So it would be an on-demand service. It would be for multiple passengers, if that worked with where the origins and destinations were going. So it'd be very similar to what our dial-a-ride service is today, which is for elderly and disabled of all ages. We could also operate a dial-a-ride type service that would be open to the public regardless of age or ability. So we're looking at, does it make sense, or is there enough demand in some of the canyon areas, whether it's Adams Hill or Chevy Chase Canyon, Glen Oaks Canyon, where, and up in the foothill area, where there isn't a lot of demand for traditional bus service, but it may make sense to say, gosh, if 3 or 4 of you are traveling and we need to connect you to a bus system, we can pick you up from some of those residential areas or the harder to reach places like Metro is looking at, and bring you down and connect you to a transit system or to a transit route that has a transfer point that would make some sense to make the trip connection. So we are looking at microtransit in what we're doing with the route analysis. We're not looking at TNCs, the Ubers and Lyfts, because there's a whole lot of issues with that still out in the public sector. We're letting other agencies kind of work through all of the legal issues that they're having with those with Ubers and Lyft type organizations. And in the meantime, we have the ability to do microtransit. We do that now. We have the resources to do it. We would just have to look at, does it make sense to deploy that kind of service? And is there enough demand in the areas around town where we don't have bus service to make that effective? The dial-a-ride type services are much more expensive. The per person trip cost is 2 or 3 times as high as what a Beeline trip cost would be. So we have to then balance out the financial resources, say, how do you deploy the service, and is there enough demand to support that service?
So this transit route analysis, thank you for that response. The transit route analysis, does this happen yearly or every 4 or 5 years, or how long has the Beeline been around? And what funds the transit route analysis?
I'll try to answer all of your things, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. We have done what we call a line-by-line analysis, which is just a study of the Beeline routes as we're currently operating them. We've done that every 5 years for the last, we've done it twice in the last 10 years. This would be the third time, the third 5-year term for doing that analysis, but we've expanded the study. So it's going to do the data collection for our current system, so we know who our riders are now, how they're traveling, what works, what doesn't work for them. But we expanded it to also look at Metro, and because we're working with NextGen for the Metro results of that, we're also looking at how does LA DOT pass through our service area, and are we making connections with them? Or are there ways where we can all partner together to make sure people can actually move where they want to move, regardless of whether it's Beeline or Metro or LA DOT or Metrolink if you're taking a rail system. So it's really looking at all the transit movement or all the potential transit movement throughout Glendale and then also the Royal Verdugo area, because we're working with Pasadena and Burbank to say, there's people in Glendale that move to Burbank and vice versa. We don't really have good connections between the two cities. So would that be a Beeline Burbank bus answer, or would that be a Metro answer? So our study is going to look a little bit beyond the traditional Beeline service to say, are we on the right street? Are we doing the right thing? Are we moving as fast as we need to? And then how collectively do we make traveling throughout Arroyo Verdugo easier, faster, better quality service? So we're paying with the service out of city funds for Glendale Transit funds. And it is Measure M, part of the new Measure M local return money.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sorry. Yes.
Okay, I guess we are done. Allison?
Thank you.
Allison, thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison.
We move to item number 7C.
Item number 7C, presentation of the Dorn Street and Broadway Brazil grade separation project and improvements.
Okay. This project will be presented by a state collaborative effort will be presented by the representative from Metro, Mr. Brian Balderrama, as well as Mr. Patrick Somerville, who is consultant. He's with the HNTB consultant for Metro, as well as with the Larry Tay, he's our principal traffic engineer. The presentation is like 23 slides. We'll go over the project, scope of work, project limits, what's entailed, what has been done now on the short term, and what will be done for the long term for the completion of this project. And we may start with Mr. Balderrama.
So my name is Brian Balderrama. I'm the Senior Director for our Regional Rail Department at LA Metro. And just to give you some overview on what the Regional Rail Department focuses on, we oversee the 152 miles of railroad right-of-way within LA County. And we work with all of the operators to improve mobility, which would be the operators would include Metrolink, Amtrak, UP, and eventually high-speed rail. This project, we're going to give you some updates on 4 main elements of the project. What's happening at the Broadway-Brazil intersection, particularly the latest updates for the signalization or modernization of the traffic signals. We're going to give you an update on the interim conditions that are happening at Doran, go through our grade separations, and ultimately give you a look at the collaborative efforts to incorporate active transportation into our project. So for this first update, we're going to give you some detailed information on the intersections of Broadway-Brazil. This is going to be a city-led project. Metro is fully supportive of this particular crossing, where we're looking at, you have a construction contractor already awarded. We are looking at completion of this project in early 2019. And I'm going to bring Larry Tay up to give you some more details on the specifics for this project.
Thank you, Brian. Chair Kirkjian, members of the Commission, Larry Tay, Principal Traffic Engineer. And as Brian mentioned, this project has really 3 primary components. Ultimately, there's going to be a grade separation. But while we're developing that project, there's 2 interim improvement projects, one of which, the first of which I'm going to discuss a little bit further. And Brian kind of mentioned it. It is some signal modifications at Broadway and Brazil, San Fernando Road intersection. And so that's really the first step toward providing some interim relief while these ultimate improvements are being developed. It's actually 2 intersections that operate as a single signal system with the railroad tracks in between. And really the objective of this interim improvement is to provide additional signal phasing flexibility and capacity at this particular location. And in other words, by upgrading the signal equipment, we can achieve the ability to concurrently serve certain compatible phases that current equipment restricts us to have to serve them one at a time. So by serving things in parallel rather than in series, we can reduce delay and increase efficiency. And I'll illustrate that in a moment. As Brian mentioned, the city is a lead agency in charge of administering the construction contract for this particular project, and it was recently awarded by council and expected to be completed in the spring of 2019. Some project details. The scope of the project generally comprise of a new traffic signal controller, enhanced phasing, and some minor changes to traffic signs and pavement markings. The contractor, where we are now, the contractor has been given notice to procure the traffic signal poles, which have like a 3 to 4, sometimes 5-month lead time, depending on supply and demand. Installation will begin shortly after the equipment is delivered. And the work is likely to require a brief or intermittent closure of the crossing itself. Staff will work with the railroad and the contractor to limit and minimize the construction impacts. Alternate access to and from the LA side of the tracks will be made available via other points of entry, such as Doran or Colorado. And detours and effective dates will be made available on the city's website long before any closures take effect. The next 2 illustrations will kind of just quickly walk us through what the project primarily strives to accomplish. The first exhibit depicts existing traffic operations and will be followed by a depiction of operations after the proposed improvements are implemented. In the center of the diagram, you'll see the railroad tracks parallel, and to the right, we have the intersection of San Fernando Road and Broadway in Glendale parallel, and to the left of the tracks, we have the intersection of West San Fernando and Brazil Street in the city of LA. And looking at the major movements, major parallel movements that are shown in green on both sides of the track, right now, based on the limitations of the signal equipment, we can only serve one set of movements, north and southbound movements at a time. So either the north and south movements on the west side of the tracks, or the north and south movements on the east side of the tracks, but we can't serve them simultaneously. And that's requiring a little bit more time and increasing delay and resulting in some motorist frustration. And really the current signal equipment is constraining us to that. But we're going to fix that. In this diagram, you'll see that San Fernando Road and, east and west on both sides of the track can move concurrently. So with that feature, that'll reduce delay on West San Fernando Road, in turn allow more of the traffic cycle to be dedicated to other phases and increase the operational efficiency at this pair of intersections and the crossing in general. It won't be perfect, but it will certainly make a noticeable and positive difference. With that, I will turn it back over to Brian.
So now another important interim condition project is what's happening at the Doran crossing. So just to give you some context, in 2012, the California Public Utilities Commission ruled that 2 interim conditions needed to be met before ultimate conditions, which would be ultimate grade separation structures. And once those grade separation structures were constructed, would allow for the actual closures of the Doran Street and Broadway Brazil intersections. Now, through that interim process, back in 2012, there was approval for one-way conditions at Doran Street. Once we moved with that, we heard back from the residents or owners from the city of Los Angeles telling us how a one-way condition would be detrimental to their businesses. We reached back to CPUC authority and asked them what is the process to modify an existing ruling. They laid out a plan for us and a schedule. We worked with all of member agencies, both the city of Los Angeles, your city here, your Palanquoni HOA, which was a signature to that 2012 ruling, and we used that unanimous support to try to push from the one-way interim condition to a two-way condition. We presented all of our findings to the California Public Utilities Commission, and we were notified by them that because of the unanimous support, we have to still go through the process, but that process will probably avoid any public outreach events that would be conducted separately by the commission, and we can go straight to approval. And that approval is expected in January 2019. So what we are doing at Metro is using that clock to try to advance the design plans as much as possible to meet that January 2019 schedule. This is what it looks like at an interim condition today, where you could see how confined some of the corners are at the crossing as you approach Doran and San Fernando. This is a little snapshot of what it could look like with that two-way interim condition. What this two-way interim condition does is uses the Metro right-of-way to open up the intersection itself. That will allow greater turns for trucks coming in and out of that intersection, as well as enable the crossing itself to be quiet zone ready. So we're using the latest technology, the latest equipment will all get incorporated into this intersection, as well as take care of Metrolink's state of good repair. Anything on their checklist that comes through this limits of work, we're putting into our construction cost estimate. So we handle everything at once, we touch everything at once, and there's no need to come back.
Question, please?
Yes.
On the drawing. The X with the RR is to advise the drivers that there's a railroad crossing approaching?
That is correct.
I see it on the left-hand turn down at San Fernando Road, and I see it on Duran Street. Is one able to make a right-hand turn into that intersection from above?
Yes. So, and then that paint showing the railroad crossing would be in the vicinity of where the 134 freeway is today.
Further up the
Yes.
up the drawing?
Outside of that window.
So a person can turn right onto Duran Street coming from San Fernando Road,
Correct.
but it looks like to make that right-hand turn, you got to make sure there's no train, because you can't stop. It's in front of the tracks there, right?
So one of the features would be what they're referred to as quad gates. So all the gates come down on both sides of the track as soon as trains are approaching. So it no longer allows for a train or a car to come, even if they're trying to get around the crossing itself, go around the median. It provides full control at the crossing to reduce those type of situations.
So I would understand in your response that anyone that wants to make a right-hand turn there needs to wait there if there's a train coming.
Correct.
They can't wait on Doran Street.
No.
But they have reference to a railroad crossing further north.
Right, and then there'll be enough signage in advance, and everything will be interconnected through a communication system that as even any type of train that comes through this area, it'll set off a signal and everything will be connected.
Thank you.
Is that being communicated by any signal phasing?
Yes, and that signal phasing is being vetted through your Public Works Department for full approval. And we've already received comments to date on our 65% design plans and are currently making adjustments to meet everybody's comments that we received.
So, and this is to staff, so are we considering any no right turn LED lighting when the gates are down?
There will be a pre-signal, and yes, there's going to be no right turn LEDs.
Okay, thank you.
So when I see that drawing up there, excuse me, the drawing you had, and then the next page shows a railroad crossing sign on Doran Street, but you'd phase that out. You see that's right there where if a person was turning right, they're going to be informed that there's a railroad crossing.
Right, so we put that signage in there just to give people a greater context of what to expect. But in this previous one, you could see the keep clear. There's only room for the one type of signage, so it would be that keep clear.
Thank you.
So once constructed, it would enable you as a city to proceed forward with a quiet zone at this location as well, similar to what you've done at Flower Street and Grandview and Sonora. What this also would do is, I mentioned we're expecting that CPUC rolling in January. Metro takes some time to put our board reports together, so we would be, as Regional Rail, putting a board report together in February to, one, let our board know of what the official ruling was, and two, request funds for the construction of those interim improvements. Again, I just wanted to reiterate, go ahead.
Question for you.
Yes.
Can we go back to visual on page number 10? Yes.
Okay.
The right arrow that's right in front of the railroad crossing, I presume that's a driveway.
Yes, it is.
Now, that driveway is going to remain because when the arms are down, will someone from the parking lot be able to come into the railroad crossing and make a right turn and approach the arm?
No, they would, once they try to make a right turn from the driveway, and the gates are fully closed, and let me point out to where those gates are for you. So these are the location of the vehicle gates, and then there's also pedestrian gates that would be introduced at this crossing. So if somebody were to try to make a right turn, even if they were sitting in this wait here, the gate arms would come down and prevent them from going through that crossing.
I mean, about how many feet away will a car be parked from the arm, let's say?
Pat, that's probably about 20, 30 feet?
Yeah, it's about 33 feet.
I mean, can that driveway be closed and they can make an exit? I can see in the visual of on the picture that there's a driveway along South Anna Road. But even though that's city of Los Angeles, but
So that property in itself sits at a higher elevation than the street. And that's their only access point, that driveway that you see.
there is a driveway, and look in the picture, next picture over there. I mean, if you go to page number 8 or number 11, there's a driveway there.
So if we look at this image, you can see that second driveway, correct. But looking, I think we've already worked with this particular owner, and both driveways are needed for their circulation.
I mean, well, most of the population there are Glendale residents that's going in and out there probably. I mean, putting them in danger, quote unquote, if we can avoid that, would be great. Because they're serving gas over there.
Correct. So what's happening is by widening up the intersection, it provides some of the turning movement as well as the sight distance that's lacking from the area. And this is our interim solution approach to once we proceed forward with this. We're still advancing the final design or ultimate conditions, which are the grade separation projects. And once those are funded and constructed, it would be full closure at this location.
Let me be devil's advocate over here.
Please.
I mean, not too long ago, it was in the recent memory, a few years ago, there was a Jeep left near Broadway and Brazil, I guess it was. Somebody went over there and left the car and tried to commit suicide. And the train, from what I recall, was derailed slightly. Should something, God forbid, something like that happens, and there's gas right next to it, are there going to be placed any barriers, concrete barriers or whatever it is, for trains not to get in there?
Yeah, beyond fencing, as an interim condition, additional fencing is being placed within 250 feet of this crossing that isn't there today. Once the ultimate conditions start advancing in design, that's when we work with all of the stakeholders to see what additional precautions or safety measures need to be put in. And one of those could be safety shape barriers around the
concrete block,
exactly.
or floating concrete walls, or something mechanisms like that.
Yes.
Thank you.
No problem. Then I'm going to bring Pat Somerville to talk to the other two items of updates for you.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. I'm Pat Somerville. I'm Project Manager for HNTB under contract to Metro for this project. The grade separation itself has two components to it. This is what we refer to as the northerly point of access. This is a connection to Fairmont Avenue off the north side of the LA Atwater area. And then the Salem-Sperry overpass. These two components work in tandem to provide a complete solution that allows us to close both at-grade crossings. It's not an either-or. These have to work together for the traffic circulation to work. And it provides the uninterrupted access over the rail corridor with minimal diversion of traffic in the after condition once the grade separations are built. Most of all, it improves the safety. Although we're doing interim improvements at Doran, 4 or 5 years ago, there was improvements done down at the Brazil Broadway crossing. You still have the inherent conflict between cars, pedestrians, cyclists, and the trains. The grade separation resolves that. So the northerly point of access is really the extension of West San Fernando Road from the Doran Street intersection. It'll continue under the 134 freeway and under Fairmont Avenue, come out over the Verdugo Wash on a bridge, and connect to the Fairmont Avenue bridge. This will be a full signalized intersection, allowing left and right turn movements in and out of the new connection. This is a rendering of what that connection would look like. This is looking to the east. You're looking right at Fairmont Avenue, and you can see coming from underneath the 134 and Fairmont Avenue and over top of Verdugo Wash, the connection up to Fairmont Avenue. One thing to point out here, and hold this for the later discussion, is there are no pedestrians or cyclists, bicycle improvements on this connection because Fairmont Avenue itself has no provisions for pedestrians or cyclists today. So keep that in mind as we go forward. The second component is the Salem-Sperry overpass. This overpass connects basically West San Fernando Road to San Fernando Road. It starts on the West San Fernando Road Sperry intersection and loops around. It'll cross over West San Fernando Road, over the rail corridor, over San Fernando Road, also over Wilson Street, and come back and join at San Fernando Road in the proximity of the Salem Street intersection. There will be a protected bike path on this facility, very similar to the Riverside Drive bridge that was opened, I think, to traffic last summer in 2017. So it'll be barrier separated, provide for pedestrians as well as cyclists to cross over this path. Here's the rendering of the overpass. Again, you can see the structure, the bridge structure that crosses over the rail corridor and the adjacent streets. Joining back in, this is a view looking to the north.
Excuse me, Pat,
Yes.
is that a structure supporting that building that you can store things, or is that just a concept sketch?
Excuse me?
On the rendering to the left,
Yes.
I noticed that it appears to be a building supporting the construction, or is that already there?
Now we go around a couple of the buildings, and then there's a retaining wall that's supporting the elevated roadway, and then it turns into a bridge as it crosses over the roadways in the rail corridor.
Okay, so what's white, kind of a cream white on the curve there, that's a retaining wall? It doesn't read like a retaining wall.
Let me point.
Oh, thank you.
So through here, this is a retaining wall
Okay.
supporting the road as the road elevates across. The retaining wall that would be on the opposite side as well. We're avoiding this property here and joining at the intersection here where Sperry Street is today.
So does that then develop a space underneath the?
Not under in this area. There's not enough clearance to be able to utilize the area underneath. There would be more opportunity over here, but we do have excess lands from the acquisitions that would be necessary for the project.
Thank you.
So this project has been through a pretty extensive alternatives analysis phase, numerous rounds of outreach with the community for both LA and Glendale, a lot of one-on-one discussions. This project and the alternatives have been in front of the commission here, as well as Glendale City Council back in 2016. It also was approved by the Metro Board, this alternative, in January 2017. From all of that outreach, one of the initial elements that came up and the concerns from the Glendale community was the cut-through traffic. What I wanted to highlight, one of those areas, was the connection of Salem Avenue to the new overpass. The concern was the use of Concord Street as a bypass for cars going to and from the 134 freeway. So in working with the community, working with the city staff, we've configured this intersection of Salem to the overpass, only allowing a right out and a left in. This eliminates the potential cut-through traffic of drivers using the overpass that would want to make a right turn onto Salem and go up Concord to get to the 134 to bypass San Fernando Road, Doran Street, or Fairmont. So we put provisions in here that met with the approval of the community. We've been working with city staff regarding this to, again, more fortify that, those treatments out there to prevent those movements. And these refinements are continuing as we advance through into the design phase of the project. The active transportation element. As I mentioned, The connection to Fairmont will not have any pedestrian or bicycle facilities on it. There's nowhere for them to go once they get to Fairmont. So under consideration are two features as part of the project. The first is what we're referring to as the Riverwalk Path Bridge. This is effectively phase 3 of your Glendale Narrows Riverwalk project. Part of phase 3 was that bridge over Verdugo Wash. The city of LA also had a similar bridge on their master plan for the LA River. This project is providing the opportunity to include that bridge over the Verdugo Wash to facilitate north-south pedestrian and bicyclist movement along the LA River. The second component, and this was again as a result of the community outreach, was if you're a pedestrian today at the Doran Street, San Fernando Road intersection, you walk 200 feet, 300 feet, and you get to the intersection at West San Fernando Road. Once that crossing is closed with the grade separation, how does that individual get there? Without a crossing, it's almost a mile worth of a walk, either up to Flower Street, back and around, or down to the New Salem Sperry overpass and back up West San Fernando Road. So what the project's going to include is a pedestrian overcrossing that'll originate at the intersection of Dorn and San Fernando Road, cross over San Fernando and the Metrolink tracks, and come back down on the LA side. This provides that direct access and connectivity, and ultimately what could be a path that connects directly to the LA River as well, and the bridge crossing the Verdugo Wash. Let me give you a little closer example of where these are going to be located. The first is the Riverwalk Bridge, which would connect to your, I think, recently completed park that is being built here right at the confluence of the Verdugo Wash and LA River. It'll connect across underneath the 134 freeway, will improve the frontage along the edge of the river to connect down to the cul-de-sac at Doran Street. This was really an enabling project as well for future phases to continue down the east bank of the LA River. We're showing a potential image of a prefabricated truss structure that would be used for an economical solution for this type of crossing. The bridge type has not been selected at this point in time. This is just a representative example of what may be placed at this location.
Excuse me, Pat, will this
Yes.
be ADA
Yes,
and bike?
yes.
Okay.
At this location, this is the river access bridge. This is the one that's going to connect Doran Street, San Fernando Road, over the top of San Fernando and the tracks. Again, showing just a representative, similar steel truss structure that would cross over. Again, this is representative. Whatever structure type we end up moving forward with, one of the benefits of this, it's very open, it's visible for security purposes. Any structure type that we're going to look at will have those similar features, but there's many options available to us. So this would provide that connectivity once the Doran Street crossing is closed. So we are currently have entered into the environmental phase of the grade separation project. We've closed out the alternatives analysis with the Metro board approval of this alternative back in January 2017. So we're moving into the environmental clearance, preliminary engineering. Shortly, we'll start moving into more of the final design features. So over the next 18 months, we will have environmental clearance and a final design ready. The next phase of work would be the right-of-way acquisition and construction based on Metro being able to secure the funding for the project. So at this point in time, we're advancing forward in environmental clearance and final design. Some contact information for you. Any questions related to the project itself? There is a project webpage that has updated information on it as well. And that concludes my presentation. Open for any questions.
Any questions?
Good, thank you.
Realistically speaking, when do you think this will be off the ground?
So realistically speaking, we're trying to take incremental bites at this. The preliminary dollar value for the interim improvements with all of the state of good repair, as well as getting it quiet zone ready, is going to be a $5 million ask to our Metro board. That we're still intending to do that ask with our February board report. Once we have that, we're each year applying for grant applications, those active transportation elements that you saw. We included them in the ATP Cycle 4 to see if funding becomes available. If funding does become available, we'll see what components of that we can advance to a construction-ready level as soon as possible if those funds land. For the other elements, which are the grade separation projects, each year that we move from environmental to final design, we can prove that our project is shovel-ready and more competitive for those funding sources. And we'll continue to do that each year to make sure that funding becomes available and work with all of our partners out there, Metrolink, High Speed Rail, to see if there's any funding opportunities that become available, or as one project closes, if there's any savings that we can transfer from that project over to the door.
Has all the securing of the lands has occurred? Have all the acquisitions have been completed, land acquisitions?
No, so through a standard environmental process, we have to get to the very tail end to identify impacts before we notify anybody that their possible property could be acquired. Because the last thing we want to do is to alert the public and get them upset, and as we go through details, we find out that their property will no longer be needed for acquisition. So once we get at the tail end of the environmental process, we can be back here to present to you, and then that would be the starting point for when we internally start working through a right-of-way acquisition process. But that Metro's position is that full right-of-way acquisition process would not start until all of construction funding is fully secured. Because the last thing we want is to make an offer and have to rescind that offer on a particular property if the funds were not available.
Right. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah. Okay. Guess we are done. Item number 8.
Item number 8 is commission and staff have comments or updates.
You want to start with staff comments first?
Sure. In addition to Doran project update that you heard tonight with this presentation, there are 2 projects that will be wrapped up. Actually, 2 will be wrapped up. That will be the Kenneth Road. That's the street improvement, including curb gutter, sidewalk, ADA compliances, improvement, as well as street resurfacing. This project limit is on Kenneth Road between Alameda and Sonora. By the end of November, mid to end November, this project will be completed. The next project is the Hoover High School, Toll Middle School, and Keppel Elementary School project. And this project also waiting for wrapping up with some traffic signal posts, and they should be completed by the end of November. And the upcoming project, that will be the Pennsylvania Avenue, the project limit between Montrose and Market Ridge, and the little section of it up to Quail Canyon Road. This is a joint venture project with the LA County Public Works. It's funded almost 50-50 due to the city limit, county limits. It's kind of right in the middle of the street. You split the improvement as well as the cost. This project will be, we had already kickoff meeting. The project will start in the next couple of weeks and expected to be completed within 75 working days, the first quarter of 2019. And the staff concluded the project update. All the information, more details on that, you can find on the city website. That's
Thank you, Mr. Hiti. Commissioner Yakubian, go ahead.
We do. A couple things, Edward. First, do we have an update? I think Commissioner Gonzalez and I are usually the champions of this issue on the 2 South on-ramp at Mountain. Any news from Caltrans as to that guardrail?
Yes, and Mr. Tay, I think he has some update on that. Yes, the staff working on it. Thank you.
Commissioner Jacoby and members of the commission, Caltrans, we've successfully engaged Caltrans in the discussion. I know it's taken a while to get to this point, but we've had some meaningful discussions and I think positive dialogue. They've made commitments to actually look at this issue, investigate it, resolve it.
They haven't looked at it to this point.
They have looked at it, but they haven't completed their findings and recommendations,
Okay.
basically.
That's fair. Okay.
But it's a good progress considering.
I'm sorry?
It's a good progress considering the project, size of the project and what we're trying to achieve, and dealing with the large organization to get their attention to those items. But it's in a progress with Caltrans.
So, if I may. Go ahead. There are two questions at that intersection. The one relative to the railing or whatever might go on the ramp as you go onto that ramp. There's also the continued frustration of people waiting for people to turn left coming from the west or from the east, and there's no one ever there except on
That's Commissioner
rare occasions. And so there are two items, not just the one.
Right. So the first response was related to the guardrail, and in terms of the no right turn on red, and the left turn movement. So basically, what we're experiencing, or what was experiencing in the past, was I'm sorry. 1 second. There was a red lock that for Commissioner Sahakian that was implemented for the westbound left turn movement, and so. What that essentially does is if a vehicle going southbound crosses over the double yellow center line and triggers those loops, the signal system there thinks that there's a demand for that westbound left turn. And so it'll serve that demand even in the absence of vehicles. We've worked with Caltrans to remove that feature from the timing. So there shouldn't be any additional instances where that westbound left turn movement is being served in the absence of vehicles. And so how that plays into the no right on red, when you're serving that westbound left, the eastbound right turn has a red indication. And a lot of drivers are wondering why in the absence of conflicting traffic. So that issue should have been resolved. Now, the no right turn on red is still in place for certain geometrical reasons, but in terms of serving a phase in the absence of demand, that issue should have been resolved. And staff has verified it in the field.
That has been resolved. But what are the geometrical reasons? I'd like to hear those.
Caltrans was citing, I believe, lane configurations, sight distance, things of those nature. And I believe one other issue was just controlling the volume of traffic that gets sent onto the ramp during the peak periods. So restricting...
The majority of the traffic that goes to that intersection comes from the west. And generally, I would say more than generally, they all want to, during peak hours, they want to turn south onto the ramp, and they still get bumper to bumper. And then there's the little place you have to kind of appropriately leave the intersection clear for the school that's there across the street. You can't block that intersection appropriately, so the cars get all jammed up there, even with what apparently has been resolved. Because the majority of the cars, if you count them, it's incredible how many come from the west on Mountain wanting to go on the 2, make a right-hand turn, or go south.
Yeah. Just to echo this, I know we keep harping on this, but we see it all the time. And I think in this particular month, September, October, this time of the year with the sun the way it is, and the curvature of the mountain and the way the road, mountain starts at Verdugo and goes up towards the freeway, there's a sudden turn in the bend of the road that a driver hits a wall, a sudden wall of vehicles who are a combination of are stopping because of the intense glare of the sun, in addition to, as Commissioner Gonzalez pointed out, the backlog of vehicles that are stopped at that light, trying to get on the 2 South. So there's it's a very it's a situation that I think can be addressed with the talent that we have to figure out. But you know, it is a difficult and tricky situation from Mother Nature and the timing perhaps of the signals. But it's not good. People are slamming on brakes, and if I don't start seeing you know, broken tail lights in that intersection by Glendale College soon, that's usually an indication of this time of year because of the immense amount of traffic going up there. But
is that signal under Caltrans control?
It is under Caltrans jurisdiction.
The timing is screwed up. Both jogs of the intersection is screwed up. No ifs and buts about it. Now I don't know if the timing is going on recall certain time of day, but it's not right. The offsets are completely off too. Have you considered have they considered the Q loop for westbound traffic onto the southbound freeway, where if it's activated, it will give you a no right turn phase for eastbound traffic?
I'm not sure if they've made those considerations. It's something we can follow up with Caltrans.
Thank you for the update on that. If we can put some dates on this, some form of a target, either, you know.
Caltrans has no dates.
Thank you, Commissioner
I
Sahakian.
feel for staff. It's not in their hands. I dealt with them for a long time. So it's challenging, and to put you on the spot, you can give them any dates you want, but
right.
it's not going to fly.
That's a good point.
I do have couple of questions. In the Ross Moines area, I noticed that there's some resurfacing going on. Is it slurry or resurfacing?
It's slurry.
It's slurry, and was that the reason why you ground basically the pavement markings?
Correct.
The street, that's why. Okay. Now, there are some streets that are concrete in the area that haven't been resurfaced or slurried in ages. And it's usually the majors, such as, you know, Ross Moines or Glen Oaks or Ethel Street. Is there a plan, and I don't know if you have an answer for this, to also maintain the concrete roadways?
We do. There's no plan to resurface them or replace them, but it's not part of this project. Due to the cost of the concrete, it's skewed the whole budget that we have in order to maintain the asphalt section, not the concrete section. We're hoping for Prop 6 not to pass. That will give the city almost an average 5.6 million a year for the next 10 years. Hopefully we can incorporate those. The costly part of any street improvement could be curb, gutter, sidewalk. In this case, the concrete slab for the pavement. But for this particular project, we're only doing the slurry seal for this area.
Can I make my last comment? Edward, as I finished my tour of duty as chairperson tonight, I perhaps should have made this comment earlier, but now I must make the comment. I need you, never asked you to do this, but I need you to go and speak directly to City Council and deliver a message from the outgoing chairperson who faced such exacerbation this past year with such important issues that were brought in front of this commission, and the failure to have another commissioner on this board is, at this point, I'm going to say unacceptable. For the reasons of discussion of Measure M and serving as the entity and agency for public hearing, that we are missing a commissioner. For the purpose that we were unable to effectively put our comments on record for the South Glendale Community Plan because we were lacking a commissioner. And I suppose I waited because I understand how busy the city council members are, but I believe it severely was detrimental to this commission, and it was very difficult, and in many occasions, in my opinion, quite shameful, and put us in a very, very difficult position as I was chairing this commission this past year. I'm going to ask that you please get to the bottom as to why we don't have another commissioner on this commission. I do not want to see Chairperson Kirkjian oversee important issues and not have that fifth commissioner. So please extend my frustration to them, and if you can come back with some answer for us as to why we don't have one or when we can have a fifth member, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Just for the record, the staff has been requesting an update because it's not something under the staff control. That's the council need to make that selection, and we'll continue to do so. But we'll emphasize on your
just for the
stressful and your frustration to have somebody really, and we understand what you went through or what happened last week also, so last meeting, so.
Exactly, with the last meeting and having to end a meeting because we don't have, a fifth person.
It's embarrassing for the city, it's embarrassing for the governance that really should be taking place, and I 100% support the commissioner's comments.
The staff will convey your request and will bring you update at the next meeting.
Perhaps the staff could make a recommendation or a discussion with the city manager, who the city manager could then speak with the council or someone to have this resolved. I would hope other commissioners would think the same and that they would see this as a unanimous request.
I'm going to ask that when we draft a letter, the commission should be sending a letter to the city manager and the council on this. It's not in their purview to do this. Either that or this commission should go to a council meeting and stand up and talk about this. But the right protocol would be to write an official letter signed by all the commissioners so it's on record. It should go to the city manager, CC to council.
I'm willing to do that.
Ditto.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Commissioner Yacoubian, thanks for bringing out that point, because last year a meeting was canceled for lack of quorum. And that was a very important meeting for South Glendale, for the fate of South Glendale, basically. Anyways, any other comments? Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll second that. Thank you.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, and have
keep the lights on.